Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today. I'm your host, Sharlee Dixon. My guest today is Robin Bartee. Robin is a licensed clinical social worker based in Louisville, Kentucky. She began working in nonprofit agencies and community education in 2001 and became a licensed behavioral health provider in 2012 after getting her master's degree in Bilingual and Bicultural Social Work at New Mexico Highlands University. Along the way in her career, Robin has served as a therapist, program creator and director, clinical supervisor, continuing education provider in trauma-informed care and cultural humility, and a contingent faculty member at New Mexico Highlands University, teaching social work ethics and research methods. She enjoys mentoring the next generation of social workers and creating self-sustaining healing systems. We're proud to have her as one of the exam prep creators and social work experts within the Level Education Group family. I'm excited to have expert Robin Bartee break down the major 2026 ASWB exam overhaul, exploring how the shift toward a more competency-based format aims to better reflect a real-world practice and create a more equitable path to licensure. Well, Robin, it is so great to have you on the show today. Welcome.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm always just very curious how people get started. So what was it that drew you to this field of social work and eventually led you to becoming an exam prep expert?
Great question. I think it's always been innate in my personality. So I'm going to rewind the clock about 35 years to 1991. I'm telling you this because I promise it's relevant. I had back surgery for scoliosis,
Wow.
and it was a challenging recovery process. And I thought I didn't have the support I wanted. So I created a support group for young people who went through it after me. And the idea was to create like a self-sustaining system where I would help one or two people through it, and then they would each help one or two people through it, and that would continue on. So it's kind of always been a part of who I am. And as I've gone through my career working with different populations and different contexts, whether it's been in direct practice with clients, as a clinical supervisor, or in a classroom in university settings, I've always tried to create supportive, self-sustaining systems where any interventions or knowledge or kindness that I pass on to whomever I'm sitting with or interacting with, that can also be passed on. Because, social workers, we are all people in the environment and we are all co-creating that environment. So as I moved away from direct practice into what I'm doing now, which is exam prep creation, it's still creating that self-sustaining environment
Mhm.
because we're helping new social workers to be able to enter the field as licensed professionals.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just as I was reading through like your bio to myself, kind of getting prepared to speak with you today, one of the things that you find interesting is something that I also enjoy is really just trying to prepare the wave of social workers to come after us. And so I agree with the change that you've made towards your career and going towards exam prep. I did something similar, even though I'm still in direct practice right now. I did a little exam prep as well, and it does make you feel like you're really working towards creating the future of social workers. And so I commend you for taking that next step. Not everyone is able to or enjoys even taking that next step in our careers to prepare those who come after us. So thank you for your time doing that there.
And yours as well.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So want to really dig deeper today into those changes to the ASWB updates. We spoke briefly before we started talking today that I, even as a practicing social worker, really didn't have much of an idea that, that these changes were coming. They just kind of popped up. Really, producer told me about them before I even knew that they were coming. And so it's quite interesting to me that, it's been 8 years since there was the last ASWB update. And I know that you don't speak directly for the board itself. You can't. But for somebody that is creating exam prep materials, what do you see as the primary goals for this, re-engineering of the exam that is happening in August of this year? And how do you see these shifts from simple just recalling of information to real world decision making? Do you think that it really will benefit the profession and candidates as they sit for the exam? What are your thoughts?
That's such a beautiful question and so multifaceted that I want to start with the big survey, huge research survey that was done by the ASWB back in 2024.
Mm.
So the sample size, they collected data from over 25,000 social workers in the United States and Canada, about 23,000 plus from the US and a little more than 2,000 from Canada. And so they asked questions about what social workers did in their day to day lives, which of these categories were important, which of these categories of knowledge came up most frequently. And then they based the structure of this new version of the exam on that data.
Okay.
And yeah, so it's very research based. And I mean, what a sample size. I mean, that's a lot of data from people
Mhm.
actually doing the work in the field. And so what they found was that what is now the current version of the exam, where ethics is a much smaller portion,
Mhm.
that in real life social work practice, as I'm sure you know, ethics is huge.
Yes.
Ethics touches every single interaction that we have.
Mhm.
And in order to ethically approach practice, you also have to have a solid background in all of the other foundational knowledge,
Okay.
right? So now we have, instead of four different subject domains or subject categories, it's down to three. So there's assessment and planning. That's one. The second one is intervention and practice. And the third is values and ethics. And values and ethics has a few more percentage points in terms of proportionality than the other two, which equates to about roughly 4 or 5 more questions on a 122 question exam, which is down from 170
Hmm.
questions. Yeah, so there's fewer questions. A
Okay.
much larger portion of them than in the past will be values and ethics. And there will be a much higher emphasis on application and reasoning instead of just simple recall or rote memorization. Because if you're in the field, you're never going to have a client come to you and ask, "Excuse me, Sharlee,
Mhm.
what level of Erickson's stages of development am I in right now?" Like that
Right.
never
Yeah.
happens,
Never.
right?
Never.
But if you don't know that material, you might pathologize something that's actually developmental.
Agree.
So the questions are more geared towards how do we practice social work? And it's not an entirely new kind of question. Reasoning and application questions have always been there.
Mhm.
They've just taken a larger role in the process, just as ethics questions have always been there. They're just taking a larger role in the exam structure. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Because I did know that there was a reduction in the number of questions, but I was curious on what that really meant. Like, what would that mean? And as a social worker, I do think many of us tend to overthink. So does that then give us more time to think harder about the same ideas? Or does that help us really give us more time to effectively think through scenarios? So is there a change in the types of questions? Is it more scenario based or
It's a lot ostensibly, it's going to be a lot more scenario based.
okay.
Of course, none of us have actually seen the new exam itself,
Mhm.
right? So I will keep using that disclaimer,
Yeah.
ostensibly, right?
Yeah.
And if you'll permit me, I would like to reframe the term overthinking to something a little bit more generous to our
Okay.
expertise, which is that it's not overthinking, it's training.
Sure.
We look at person and environment. We look
Absolutely.
at all of the puzzle pieces, bio, psycho, spiritual, social, historical. We look at all of these dimensions and layers and levels of things that affect a client, a community, a
That is
situation,
true.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when
Mm-hmm.
we look at an exam question, it's not that we're overthinking it, it's that we're so used to thinking in 3 dimensions, 4 dimensions, if you include
Mm-hmm.
time, that a 2 dimensional test question throws us for a loop,
Agree.
right? So we're
Yeah.
still looking for all of these elements that aren't there instead of trusting that the test is not here to defeat us, but to
Mm-hmm.
give us an opportunity to trust it at face value, take those questions at face value, trust that they have in those scenarios everything we need in order to get the question right. Unlike in real social work practice, we rarely have all of the pieces of the puzzle to get it right on the very first try.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's not overthinking, it's training. And we can bring our training to the test questions and the test taking process while trusting that the test taking process is not meant to befuddle us. It's not meant to discover our inadequacy. It's meant to test whether or not we know how to be social workers. And we do.
We do. We do. And it's interesting that you brought that piece up because I will not date myself here, but when I was when I was in a master's program many moons ago, most of the conversations around the and I am licensed at the master's level, not independent yet. Most of the conversations around just even that level of licensure, the exam that goes with it, were more like, okay, don't take the test with the idea of what you would actually do. Take the test with the idea of what the books say to do, because they, not to say that they're completely different things, but there are times when your training comes into play as far as what I know can happen, all of the different dimensions of a person's life, all of the pieces of their environment, how they can impact the choices that they make versus what the black and white rote memorization of a book says I should do based on where their strict thinking is in that moment. And so it's interesting that that is now something that's being looked at. I appreciate that. And I do think that it hopefully will be a much better or much more accurate assessment of what social workers are able to do without some of that level of fear around, can I really take this test? Can I really show what I have to offer?
Sure. And absolutely, every single person is going to come into it with different academic experience
True.
despite having gone to a CSWE
Mhm.
accredited program. Each of those programs has their own idiosyncrasies and approaches, right?
Right. Mhm.
And each of those programs is enmeshed in a culture, right? So, program
Right.
and environment, as
Right.
well as the person and environment, our own culture, our own upbringing, and our own field experience when we come in, right? So, it's not quite so much that you won't have to know the textbook information. You do. Absolutely, you do.
Yeah.
And there will still most likely be some recall questions,
Yeah.
especially at like the bachelor's level and the master's level, where each level is going to require ostensibly more reasoning
Got you.
than the levels previous. Does that make
Got you.
sense?
It
Okay.
does. It does. It does.
And yeah, and also when we look at things like racial, cultural, and socioeconomic disparities in the pass fail rate, the hope is that the newer version of the test will address those disparities somewhat. And the ASWB has, and let me quote because I do not want to misquote what they are saying here, that any questions identified as potentially biased as well as those failing to accurately test a candidate's knowledge, are not included on the exam.
Hmm.
And then causes of disparities, here's where they kind of put their own disclaimer. Causes of disparities are deeply rooted in the fabric of socioeconomic systems. And so they're not claiming that the test is going to eliminate those pass-fail rates. And I think one of the things, so I graduated with my master's in social work in a bilingual, bicultural social work program. So specifically looking at Spanish-speaking populations in the Southwest, right? And so having worked with that and worked in Spanish, I was coming at some of the questions back in the day, way back in the day, differently than
Mm-hmm.
if I had come from a different point of view. So it's a matter of being able to recognize, as we should as social workers, whether it's an exam setting or with a client, this is what's appropriate to the situation, and this is where I'm coming from, and where is that gap and how big is it?
Got you.
And that is a social work practice skill if ever there was one.
Absolutely.
And so that's another social work practice skill that we have to take to the exam.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought up the pass rate gap because there has been significant discussion around it. I'm in a few different groups, we'll call them support groups on Facebook, and many of them over many, many years have discussed those pass rate disparities. Honestly, that's kind of what brought me into the exam prep space because I was quite curious as a person of color. Well, maybe I need to bring my experience as a person of color to the exam prep space so that I could better prepare those who look like me to pass the test as well. And so ASWB has gotten quite a lot of flack for, those disparities that are there. And of course, some of that does come from, deep seated systemic inequalities, which aren't necessarily ASWB's creation. And I know that they can't necessarily say that this redesign is going to eliminate all of those options or all of those issues that, that are created there because many of them are environmental. It's not necessarily just something that can be changed by just a testing environment. But I'm glad to hear that ASWB is addressing those concerns because they are things that again have been said in many social work spaces at this point for over a decade. So I am glad to hear that change is coming. I'm just curious to see what that will look like. I know we had been with AATBS, we had done maybe a few years ago. We started to change our exam prep questions, changing just simple things like names, maybe some of the scenarios in those questions, the vignettes for them, just to switch things around to offer a different cultural impact or awareness there. So I'm curious to see what ASWB is going to bring to it and what your thoughts are about what types of things that they may bring to this exam.
While it's hard to say
Yeah.
precisely, in the ethics domain, which again has had the largest proportional growth compared to the other domains,
Right.
there are three kind of different sections of content within it. And one of them focuses specifically around social justice, equity, diversity, ability and disability, access, things like that. So it it is possible and hopefully likely that that will show up more in terms of recognizing maybe some nuance when it comes to
Nice.
ethics.
Nice.
Again, I haven't seen the new version of
Right.
it. These are my hopes based upon the knowledge that I have and everything that I've read from the ASWB and what we've been working on at AATBS.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor.
Are you preparing for a licensure exam in psychology, social work, marriage and family therapy, counseling, or behavioral analysis? AATBS is here to help. We have been supporting behavioral and mental health students to prepare for their licensure exams for more than 45 years. working with over 1 million students to succeed on test day and move on to the next step in their career. With products ranging from comprehensive courses to quiz banks and delivered live online, self-study online, and in print, AATBS has test prep solutions that meet every student's needs and learning styles. Visit us today at aatbs.com. That's aatbs.com and use promo code BHT15 to save 15% off your next purchase.
Nice, very nice. That's kind of where I was wondering. I hadn't read it more of the newer things, so I was curious on what those, if they did have sections on social justice, especially given the political climate that we are currently. And I won't just say political because it is an everyday issue at this point. So just the climate that we are all experiencing on either side or all sides or in the middle, whatever. And so I'm glad to hear again that hopefully some of that will be addressed. So my other piece, or I guess many other pieces of this, but I have a question for those of us who are, students that may be graduating this year, or people who have been studying to take the exam. I have quite a few coworkers who are currently and have been for the last maybe year or 6 months or so studying for their independent licensure exam. What factors do you think they should consider when deciding whether they need to, let's go ahead and hurry up and take this test before August changes happen? Or should they wait for these new changes to occur, the last half of the year? What should they consider?
Great question. Great question. So when we look at now versus later, I want to look at a lot of different factors that may affect somebody's choices. So here are some indications that maybe taking it now would be a good idea, right? So if someone is a recent graduate and they've got all of that academic knowledge in their brain and they're coming straight out of school, maybe they've had a field practicum, but they haven't had a lot of real world social work experience, the current exam might be the right fit for them, right? Also, people who are good at memorization, who are more interested in taking an exam with kind of more concrete and recall based question, right? Someone who's good at standardized tests, right? And then also anyone who has applied and they have authorization to take the test, right? Then they need to really take a look at when that authorization expires so they make sure they get in before that expiration. Otherwise, they have to start that process again.
Okay.
One note on trying to get in before the changes is that Pearson VUE is experiencing a bit of a rush on registration because people are nervous about the unknown entity of the new version of the test.
Right.
Okay. So for people who might want to consider taking the next version of the test, the one that comes online in August, people who are better at being analytical than they are at memorization. People who have more experience in the field, or like seasoned veterans in the field, right? If you've been doing this at the master's, at an MSW level for a while, you know how things go. You know how to reason your way through unexpected scenarios. You do it every single day, right?
Yeah.
So you have more of that real world. What would you do? What should you do first? What's the most important? You have more of that practice already. If you're someone who needs more time per question, right? Maybe you just need that little bit of a buffer because you're going from 170 questions, 150 of which are actually scored, to 122, 110 of which are actually scored. So that gives you a bit more time per question, which can relieve some of that pressure.
Right.
As well as someone who is better with concepts and relational learning instead of informational learning, although you have to know the information in order to use it.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So the passing scores for those two exams, I'll just give those numbers out in case anybody likes to think about numbers. So the old exam, 150 out of 170 questions were scored. So you needed to get 90 to 107 correct. Now, why the range? The range is because there are always multiple versions of the exam circulating at any given time. You might be sitting next to someone in the testing center who's getting a totally different version of the exam than you are. And that's just part of how it's created. And the new exam, there's 122 questions, 110 of which are scored. So the pass rate ranges from 66 correct answers to 78 correct answers. And again, that's because there will be multiple versions of the test, some of which are harder or have more reasoning questions, some of which are, considered by the test makers to be a little bit easier, right? And that's just part of the exam creation process, according to the ASWB website.
Gotcha. Okay. I could see a person on either end of the spectrum trying to make that choice. I am more of the latter. I've been here for a while. I've done the daily reasoning for almost 20 years at this point. And so not to say that I cannot and I don't know the book knowledge, but trying to recall it all 20 years in is a little bit more difficult than me trying to reason my way through scenarios and situations that I deal with on a daily basis. So I could see, having to try to figure out test now or wait. It can be a difficult choice for those who are, trying to figure out the testing situations for now. Personally, I am still in my independent licensure journey, so I have a ways to go. So it'll be the second one for me, but I'm interested to hear though from those who are in the midst of trying to make that choice, how they would choose. I know that you've been a supervisor before. So in your experience, when you were guiding supervisees through this, if you are a supervisor right now, how would you have the conversations with your supervisees about how to prepare for this shift? I would assume that you'd want to start doing more of case study style of thinking or preparation, but curious what your thoughts are on how to prepare supervisees for these upcoming changes.
Great question. So I think, in my experience, clinical supervision has always looked at case studies, like the
Mhm.
actual case studies of the supervisee or the group of supervisees. So that's a great thing to continue and to also ask more probing questions of the supervisee, right? What are the ethical considerations here? Why did you choose that intervention? How did you assess? What did you assess for? What might have improved your assessment? Right? So really thinking both more granularly as well as more big picture, more puzzle pieces to just kind of bring that book learning back in, as well as the field experience and really weaving those together.
Gotcha.
Because you need both in practice and in taking the test. And then, as always, both with practice and in test taking, you've got the same two basic rules for success: safety first,
Yeah.
always, and then
Um,
start where the client is. And every reasoning question has one of those elements. Is it a safety question, or do I need to attune more closely to what the client is saying they need?
Gotcha.
Right? And again, I say that having created test prep materials, not having seen the new version of the test itself.
Mhm.
But having taken the old version, those two questions in my head at all time helped me to pass all of the reasoning questions that seemed like trick questions years and years ago.
Gotcha.
Right? And
Makes
it
sense.
helps you with your clients as well. So it's what you need to know as a social worker.
Right.
Is does that answer the question you were trying to ask?
It does. It does. Because I'm again just getting started on my journey. And so I was curious on how that piece of that worked. And so being able to help those and taking the case study piece a bit further, that taking that a step further and figuring out what questions to ask yourself. And so while it is, yes, it will be useful for the supervisee and supervisor in that relationship there, just that piece of a tool at the end, those two things, safety first, and starting where the client is, goes into what social work practice really looks like on a daily basis. Like that is literally what I do every day in the dialysis clinic. Before that, I did the same thing in, the school system. Before that, did the same thing in child protective services. Like it is, those two things are what are used on an all the time basis to help make the choices that we make. So it absolutely answered that question. But it does kind of bring me to my next thing about study materials. So if I was going to study at this point, I know that, a common fear right now is, should I even start studying? Should I just wait? Are materials, are they just obsolete at this point? If I don't plan on taking the test before August, do I just wait to see, how materials will change once, we've actually seen the new versions of the test? What choices are we or should we be making as the study materials, transition is along with the test as it transitions?
Yeah, that is a really important question. So the content hasn't changed.
Mm,
The structure has,
nice.
right? So if you have to answer a reasoning question about a scenario and you don't know about human development, you don't know for the clinical level, you don't understand diagnostics, right? Or you don't know the code of ethics inside and out, you're not going to be able to answer a reasoning question or an application question. It's just the content remains the same. It's just asking you to be able to use it instead of to regurgitate it perfectly.
Gotcha. That's an excellent answer to that question. Just not, you aren't regurgitating it perfectly, but how are you able to use it in everyday life? That's perfect.
Yes.
That is
Yeah.
perfect. And while I know that it can be or is daunting for myself, many others included that are, haven't made it to that level yet, to know that there are significant changes coming, but just knowing that changes are there for that reason. How are you able to use the knowledge that you have, not just can we spit this knowledge back out? It's nice to
Sure.
know that that is what it's there for.
Sure. And I think a lot of times when people look at a test question, they read the answers first, and
Mhm.
that can be fine, right? That can be great. And for a reasoning question, it's also important to read the question exactly as it is without trying to muddle it in with the answer options, because
Yep.
all of them except one will be wrong.
That's true.
So you're adding in puzzle pieces that don't belong there, right? So reading the question itself first and seeing if in your mind, in your heart, in your bones as a social worker, do you already have an answer in mind? Can you find it in that list?
Hmm.
Because instead of all, easy to eliminate one answer, you're going to have more three options. There will still be some four option,
Okay.
but there will be more three options. That's going to cause like less noise and mental energy expended unnecessarily, but they will be what's called attractive distractors. They're distracting
Mm,
you from the right answer. So if you
okay.
already have them in your head when you're reading the question, it may be that they're causing more noise.
Mm,
Does that make sense? Now,
it does.
I say that coming from, having helped students as a professor take tests in the classroom, it would be the opposite. It would be the absolute opposite. And some test materials might tell you to read through everything first and then read through it again. All of those are completely valid. But if the noise distracts you when you're taking practice tests and you can't figure out why, eliminating some of that noise can be useful.
Got you. Okay.
Start
No,
where
no,
the
go ahead.
client is, start where the question is.
Got you. Okay.
What are you actually looking at? And then knowing that you may already know the right answer
Hmm.
because they are more practice based.
Right. Okay. And then that was actually one of the questions that I was going to ask you about, is that I did hear that there was a shift towards more three option questions versus four. And does that like make the questions easier, or what were your thoughts on that?
It might for some people, it might make them harder for other people.
Mm,
And I know that's an unsatisfying answer. The idea in making a good test is to have the incorrect answers be near misses, not obvious. But if you know the answer to the question, then the right answer is already in your head before you even look at the answer option.
Sure.
If you don't know the right answer, attractive distractors, like those near misses, can
Mhm.
trip you up. But that's the case whether there are 4 or 3 answer options.
Got you. I agree. I agree. Okay. And so looking even more into the future, because it seems like ASWP is going to continue to change, which is nice to see. I am hearing and seeing lots about the Universal Interstate Licensing Compacts. Very excited to see them happening. I don't have the exact number because it almost seems like every other week or so, more and more states are coming along. And I think we're at least 25 to 30 at this point, the last time I checked. So do you see this shift specifically focusing on a consistent ethics heavy standard of competency as a necessary step to give state regulators the confidence they need to finally make license portability a reality across the country? So does it make it easier for all states to say, okay, we agree with this, let's have one universal licensure, throughout the whole country?
Personally, yes, I see it that way. And I think that with a heavier emphasis on ethics and a heavier emphasis on practical questions, right,
Mhm.
as opposed to regurgitation questions, you are getting more at what it takes to be a qualified ethical social worker, which is applicable across state lines, hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Hopefully. Hopefully. Yes, I'm excited to see how things continue to go. I tell the story of kind of a bit, but my family moved about 3 years ago, and we just moved from South Carolina to North Carolina, and the differences in the licensure levels, even from one state to the next, even though we are border states, it's quite different and rather frustrating. And so it's quite excited to see more and more states come along with the compacts. And so I'm interested to see how that continues to grow. And I do agree with you that with a more ethics based, test or licensure exam, I do think and hope that more states will continue to come on board as well, because it does show more of a qualified ethical social worker. You are ready to work across, state lines and have that licensure there and not just one state.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So, for those that may be feeling the looming deadline, that anxiety around all of that, where is the best place for them to track official updates and find materials specifically designed for these 2026 changes?
Sure. So the first place that someone could look would be the ASWB.org website. There are also ASWB guides for both the old and the new version already up there, so people can look at that.
Okay.
They can also register, they can apply for test taking accommodations called non standard arrangements for the test taking environment, including ESL. And then also AATBS, which stands for Association for Advanced Training in Behavioral Sciences. Test taking materials of all kinds are available, as well as a very good breakdown of the old test version versus the new test version, timelines, and everything like that.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Robin. I have really appreciated you speaking with us today.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.
And thank you to our listeners for taking the time to join us. You can follow us on our social media at Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube, and more at Behavioral Health Today. And if you like our show, give us 5 stars and leave us a review. As always, the resources for this episode and an archive of all of our other episodes can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. And we look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.